We're going to start looking at audio and what we need to do for audio, because what makes a good app a great app is when you can have some good quality audio sounds, and often that means being able to control the volume and turn audio off and on. But before we do that, and before we get into editing audio, it's important to have a little bit of theory behind audio. So I just want to go through a quick presentation to talk about audio. So here on the screen is an outline of what we're going to do. I have a question for you to ponder, talk about sound and how it works, and then I'll give you an answer to that question we have at the beginning, and then we talk about audio that's on the computer. So to get started, the question that I want you to ponder: if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around, does it make a sound? Now that's an old philosopher's question. There's a lot of fun answers to that, but there is a technically correct answer to it, and that's what we want to focus on when we talk about audio, is having the right answer to this. And so what we need to do, first of all, is understand how audio is produced and how do we hear things with our ears. So let's go through what sound is. And sound is a set of vibrations that can be heard. And these vibrations are actually known as acoustic pressure. So we have acoustic pressure where we can hear things. This is part of Newton's theory that's in practice. And Newton's theory states that for every action, there is an equal or opposite reaction. So when something happens, something else is going to happen. So you'll see an example of that shortly. So if a person starts talking, let's go through this scenario. So here I have a person ready to start talking. And what's going to happen is the acoustic pressure from the person's mouth is going to move the molecules. So let's use these 4 dots as molecules, and molecules don't always stay at rest. Molecules move and vibrate and shake a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're just going to pretend that these molecules are just kind of moving in that area. They don't move very much, but let's say they're at rest and they look something like this. As the person talks, you can see that first molecule moves over and then it collides into the next molecule, the molecule beside it. That second molecule then moves over and collides into the first molecule. Meanwhile, the very first molecule has moved back, it's bounced back. And then what will happen is that third molecule collides with the fourth molecule, and the second molecule then slides back. So you have this animation of things going back and forth. This is similar to something called Newton's cradle, and I'm sure you've seen this many times. And Newton's cradle, basically, it looks like this. So I happen to have one here with me. And basically, if I take one molecule here and it hits the other molecules, you see the reaction and how it goes back and forth like that. And if I happen to have 2 molecules that move, then you get the other 2 flying out the other side. That's Newton's theory. Whenever there's an action, there's an opposite reaction. Okay? So that is what Newton's cradle and Newton's theory is all about, and that's basically the way sound is going to happen, where we start to move these molecules back and forth. So it's the acoustic pressure. When the acoustic pressure reaches your ear, that acoustic pressure is then converted into sound. When acoustic pressure reaches a microphone, what it does, it creates an electromagnetic signal which can then be recorded. So what's going to happen is the acoustic pressure is going to move the diaphragm of a microphone, which is converted into an electromagnetic sound, which is why you can hear what I'm saying through this microphone that I have clipped on. To hear recorded sounds, what has to happen is a speaker needs to vibrate to create the acoustic pressure. So you can see how I have a diaphragm here that's vibrating and it creates the acoustic pressure, so you're then going to be able to interpret that into sound. The speaker is the exact opposite of a microphone. A microphone receives the acoustic pressure, whereas the speaker makes the acoustic pressure by vibrating the diaphragm and pushing out those sound waves. So here you can see the diagram of the speaker pushing out sound, and here sound waves are going into the microphone, and it's on the diaphragm that it starts to vibrate. The diaphragm is over a magnet, creating an electromagnetic signal which can then be recorded. Now, did you know, here's a neat little thing, and I found this out way back when I was in the television program and I was doing a lot of video production. Did you know that you can actually use a microphone as a speaker? And it was kind of funny because there's one night I was at City Council. We were recording City Council, and we forgot to bring headphones. So we had to test to make sure our audio was working. And basically what I did is I plugged the microphone into the earpiece jack, and then put the microphone up to my ear and played back the tape. And that way I could hear the recording. But I'm sure people must have thought it was pretty funny seeing a student with a microphone in his ear. They're probably wondering, what are they teaching us here at the college? But it actually is a neat way, if you don't have headphones, you can actually use the microphone as an earpiece. So getting back to our question, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? And the technically correct answer to that is, no, it doesn't. And I'm just wondering how well you did. Hopefully you got the right answer. Now the next part of the question is, why doesn't it make a sound? And that has an answer as well. What happens is when the tree falls, it creates acoustic pressure. But it stays acoustic pressure until it's detected by some sort of pickup device, such as your ear or a microphone. So when a tree falls in the forest, it creates acoustic pressure. It's your ear that interprets it into sound, or a microphone that can create an electromagnetic pulse, save the information, and then when it's played back on a speaker, it goes back to the acoustic pressure that your ear can hear. There are three main components. This is for the audio in the computer. There's three main parameters. You have the sample rate, the bits per sample, and the channels. You do need to know these settings, so I think it's very important that you understand these settings, or we'll get into them. The sample rate is the number of times the computer is going to sample the sound, or the number of times the sound card is going to listen to the sound coming in. That's how many times it's going to listen to it. And the reconstruction of your sound depends on how many samples you have. So we use the sample rate to reconstruct the WAV file, and we try to go and recreate the original sound. Now, if I had something like this, so this would be like a sine wave or tone, and you can see that when you're at 0, that means you're at rest. So again, you have the molecule moving in a positive direction, so that's as that red curve starts to go up, it moves in a positive direction. It collides with the second molecule and then starts to go back, and eventually goes into a negative direction, and then collides with the previous molecule and then moves up. So you get this cycle going over a certain period of time. Now, if we had a sample rate of 9, okay, the wave is going to look something like this. So you can see how we have that green line with 9 different samples. We have a sample at the very beginning. That's why we jump up to the top. We move across. We have a sample rate a little further on. We move down. And so we're kind of averaging up the sample rate. So if you take a look at the green line and the original sound wave, which is the red line, does 9 samples recreate that sine wave perfectly? And the answer is no. But the computer, remember, it's an absolute thing. It's going to have a very specific address. And so if you sampled this 9 times, you're going to get a very boxy kind of sound wave. So you're not going to be able to reproduce the sound. So let's say we have this blue line, and we've sampled it now 20 times. So now you can see that, well, the blue line looks a little bit better than the green line. It's still not perfect. So with a sample rate of about 20, it's getting better, but it's not perfect. So the more samples you have per second, the better the computer is going to be able to recreate the original sound. And that's what we want to try and focus on, is getting enough samples per second so we can recreate that sound. Right now, we're focusing on just a single tone. So you just have that red line. It's just very smooth and very easy to follow. But if we had voices, or if you have a piano, you're going to have all these different vibrations within that line. And so it's going to be very difficult to recreate with just 20 samples. So higher sample rates will help you reproduce the sound. There are 4 common sample rates used on the computers. One is 11,025, or 11 kilohertz, and that basically is going to give you a telephone quality. So if you want to hear what a phone sounds like, if you want to take your sound file and make it sound like a phone, you can do something like this. I recommend different methods. We basically, in mobile apps, we won't use sound at this quality. Then you get into 22 kilohertz, which is FM radio, and then the common one is 44 kilohertz or 44.1 kilohertz, which is what your CD quality audio is. And the CD quality audio is the de facto standard. And by de facto standard, I mean that that is where everything is tested against. So you're either better than, at, or below CD quality. So we kind of hover around that range. So if you have more than 44,000 samples per second, then you can be better than CD quality audio. If you have less than 44,000, such as 22,000, then you're going to be less than CD quality audio. So that's kind of where our range is going to be. There is another standard of 48,000, and this primarily is for your DVDs, cable, and satellite. Bit depth is the second one, and bit depth means how much memory or how many bits are there for every sample. So if I'm sampling something 44,000 times a second, I'm going to take a little chunk of memory and allocate, this is what the sound is, this is the address of where that sound is, and I do that 44,100 times a second. I need to know, well, how much of an address do I have? And there's usually 3, maybe 4 different bit levels, and we'll go through them very quickly. The higher the number, the better the frequency is going to be. It's kind of like if you think of color. If you have an 8-bit graphic, that means you can have 256 colors. If you have a 24-bit graphic, that means you can have 16.7 million colors. It's the same thing with your audio. If you have an 8-bit sample rate, you won't have a very small range for your address. If you have 16 bits, you got a larger range. You can have up to 64,000 different variances with 16 bits. And if you get to 24-bit, you get up to the 16.7 million different options that you have. So you can store a lot more information, a lot more address points for your audio with 24-bit as compared to just 8-bit. So the 4 common bit depths, one is 8 bits, again getting you to the telephone quality. 16 bits, so for every sample we would have 16 bits, and again this is your CD quality audio. 24 bits is for mixing your CDs or your music, and you get into 32 bits when you're going to get into multi-track recordings, and some of the filters that we work with can be fairly complex. So when we get to the fast Fury filters and transformations, then you probably want to use a 32-bit sample rate, and we'll go through that with some of the audio settings that we're going to play with using Audition. Channels is the third one, and with channels you have stereo, which are 2 independent channels. So the right channel and the left channel are independent of each other. So you can have, the Beatles were one of the first groups to do a lot of work with this, where they'll have one soundtrack on one channel and a different bit of sound on a second channel. And the 2 are totally independent of each other. So that would be your stereo soundtrack. CD audio is stereo. CD audio does not support 5.1 surround sound. 5.1 surround sound, or even up to 7.1 surround sound, is supported usually with like DVDs, and some cable or satellite packages can also support 5.1 and 7.1 surround sound. Anyway, so as I said here, surround sound is used by DVDs, digital cable, and satellites. The higher the quality, the larger your file size. And it does have a big impact on streaming, and there are ways of compressing it and streaming it, and we'll talk about that in a later lesson. But it shouldn't have an impact on your editing. When you're recording your audio, when you're doing the editing, when you're doing the mixing, keep the quality as high as possible. You're going to have large file sizes, which is fine, because you're going to be carrying them around on a hard drive or on your computer, which is fine. You don't want to work with low quality audio files because you're going to produce something that's very poor quality. So keep the quality high while you're doing the recording. Okay. You can optimize video if it's set to stream, so we can do the same thing with the audio. We can optimize it so we can stream this audio. So a quick summary is, one, you need to know the role of these 3 parts: the sample rate, the bit depth, and the channels. So again, sample rate is the number of times the computer samples the sound. The The bit depth is how much memory does the computer allocate for each sample that it takes. And then your channels. Do you have 1 or 2 channels? And most of the time when we're recording, we're actually recording in stereo, so we often will have 2 channels. And you'll see that when we use our software in an upcoming tutorial. Also know what your CD quality settings are. This is a good test question. That's a hint. So please make sure you understand these numbers and know what they are. Keep in mind, sound is acoustic pressure, and so when you have acoustic pressure, it's your ear or a microphone that's going to convert it into sounds that we can hear and understand. So hopefully that gives you some background into audio and how it works, and don't forget the Newton's cradle, and this is how sound works, where you have a molecule hitting the next molecule, and the energy is then transferred over, and eventually, as it's picked up by your ear, is converted into sound. So as we move on in this area, what we'll do is we'll start to work with sound inside of Audition, which is our sound editing program. If you don't have Audition, you can use other programs such as Audacity, and you can download that. And, currently, that's a free application that you can use for recording and editing your sounds.